I prayed every single day for 31 years. And when I died, I was taken straight past the light and shown the room where my life had actually been decided. Not heaven, not yet. Somewhere else first. Somewhere no one had ever warned me existed. Let me be clear about who I was, because it matters for what happened next. I was the kind of man other men pointed to as an example. I ran a small business, I served on committees, I gave to causes, I read my books in the morning before work, and I knelt by my bed at night before sleep. If you had stopped any of my neighbors on the street and asked them to name a decent person in our community, my name would have come up in the first three. I knew this. I relied on it. It was the scaffolding my whole sense of self was built on. I was 54 years old the afternoon my chest decided the scaffolding didn't matter. I was carrying a box of files across a warehouse floor, an ordinary box, an ordinary Tuesday, when something inside my sternum detonated. There is no other word for it. A heart attack doesn't feel the way the movies show it. It feels like someone has strapped a vise to the center of your rib cage and turned the handle until the metal starts to give. I went down onto one knee, the box went sideways, I tried to stand, and my left side refused to acknowledge the instruction. My vision narrowed into a single gray tunnel with a pinhole of warehouse at the end of it, and then the pinhole closed. I was flatlined for 11 minutes, 2 paramedics working on me, 3 shocks from the defibrillator. The final report would later describe my clinical condition during those 11 minutes, using a phrase I would read many times before I could make peace with it. No sustainable cardiac rhythm, no spontaneous respiration, no neurological response to stimulus. Gone. By every instrument they had, completely gone. But what I am about to describe to you did not happen in those 11 minutes in the warehouse. Or it did, but not the way any of the research papers would frame it. Because the first place I was taken was not the luminous one. It was a room with a long table and 7 figures seated at it, and a plan written across its surface that contained every private choice I had ever made, and every private choice you are making right now. The pain was there, and then it was simply not there anymore. I don't mean it faded. Fading is what pain does in this life. It diminishes by degrees. It negotiates with you. It leaves a residue. This was different. This was a pain that had been taking up the entire volume of my chest one heartbeat, and in the next heartbeat, it had never existed. Not suppressed, not dulled, unwritten. Like finding out after years of limping that the limp had been a rumor you'd been telling yourself. And with the pain went the weight. I hadn't noticed in 54 years of carrying it around how much a human body weighs. The constant, low-grade labor of having bones. The effort of keeping a spine upright against gravity. The work your lungs do without ever asking to be thanked. All of it. Every ounce of that daily exertion was suddenly lifted off me the way you might lift a winter coat off a child who has fallen asleep under it. I didn't float. It wasn't floating. I was simply released. Time left the same way. The warehouse, the paramedics, the ceiling lights overhead, the urgent voices calling my name, all of it receded into something that wasn't distance exactly. It was more like the way the sound of a room disappears when you go underwater. Still there, no longer relevant, no longer the thing I belonged to. And in the stillness that replaced it, I became aware that I was not alone. I was being escorted. Not dragged, not judged, not welcomed, escorted. By a companion I could feel but not yet see, moving with me through a passage I could not measure. And the first place that companion brought me to was not the place I had spent my whole life praying toward. The first thing I saw was the table. It was longer than any table I had ever seen. The length of a city block, maybe more. Though length was a concept my mind was already beginning to lose its grip on. The surface was dark, not black, but the color of something that had absorbed light for so long it had forgotten how to return any. And around it sat 7 figures. I will try to describe them, though the description will fall short. They were not monsters. That is the first thing you need to understand. If they had been monsters, fanged, clawed, grotesque, I would have recognized them instantly, and the whole operation would have failed. They were magnificent, tall, composed, radiating a kind of cold, intelligent dignity that in my life on earth I had sometimes mistaken for holiness. Their faces were beautiful in a way that hurt to look at, the way a polished blade is beautiful when you realize what it is designed to do. And on the surface of the table, written in something that moved like mercury, was a plan. Not a plan for one person, a plan for the entire human population, continent by continent, city by city, household by household. Every decision being made by every human being on Earth was mapped on that table in real time, and seated around it, those 7 strategists were moving pieces the way generals move armies, not shouting, not celebrating, working, calmly, methodically, like craftsmen who have been at the same trade for longer than any of us can comprehend. And my escort, whose presence I still could not see, but whose patience I could feel like a hand on my shoulder, said only, "Watch. Watch how they work." I watched, and I saw that their entire operation, their whole immense and careful engine, was driven by just 2 fuels. Only 2. Everything they did, every nudge they gave to every life on Earth, was designed to ignite one of these 2 burners inside the human heart and keep it burning. The first was hatred. Every kind of it. The loud kind that screams in the streets, and the quiet kind that simmers across a dinner table. The large hatreds between nations, and the small hatreds between brothers. Resentment. Bitterness. The slow, corrosive kind that a person can carry for 40 years without ever calling it by its real name. The second was fear. Fear of loss, fear of scarcity, fear of being overlooked, outperformed, forgotten, fear of what your neighbor thinks, fear of what the future will take from you. Fear dressed up as ambition, fear dressed up as caution, fear dressed up as common sense. That was the entire strategy. 2 fuels. And what stunned me, what left me genuinely speechless as I watched their table, was how effective it was. They did not need to make anyone do anything dramatic. They did not need to corrupt anyone, obviously. They simply kept the flame of one of those 2 fuels alive in the center of each life and let the human being do the rest. The rest was automatic. The rest we did to ourselves. And then the plan on the table zoomed in, past the continents, past the cities, past my country and my town and my street, and a single name appeared, traced in that mercury light, and the name was mine. And I saw what territory I'd surrendered, without ever realizing I was at war. I saw the arguments I had replayed in my head for 20 years, always emerging the hero, always proving my point. Marked, fed. I saw every time I had smiled politely at a neighbor while keeping a private ledger of their faults. Marked, fed. I saw the ambition that had looked so much like diligence to everyone around me, including especially to me, and I watched it be marked, fed. My prayers themselves, many of them, were on that table. Not all, but many. Prayers that had at their core the quiet question, am I being seen doing this? I had been a soldier in someone else's army for 31 years, and I had not even known there was a war. And then, gently, decisively, without any violence, my escort turned me away from that table, and the dark surface, and the 7 craftsmen, and the Mercury plan all receded at once, and I was walking towards something else entirely. The air changed first. The air. I don't know how else to say it. The oppressive, polished coldness that had surrounded the table was simply not there anymore, and in its place was something that filled my lungs. I did not have lungs, and yet it filled them, with the first honest breath I had ever taken. Like stepping out of a sealed room after a lifetime of assuming that sealed room was the whole world, and a landscape opened in front of me. I will not call it heaven, because I was told clearly, in that same wordless way my escort spoke, that this was not yet. This was a vision, a window, a glimpse of what had been prepared for the day when the whole long war would be over, and the earth itself would be given back, remade, restored, not a replacement for this world, but this world, finally healed. The colors came first. Every shade I had ever seen on Earth had been, I realized in that instant, a kind of faded rumor of the color it was meant to be. Grass that seemed to hum with its own vitality. A sky that did not end at any horizon but simply kept opening. Water somewhere in the distance catching light that had no single source. And across that restored field, people. Rising. Opening their eyes as though from the gentlest sleep a human being has ever been allowed. Bodies that had been broken, shrunken, hollowed out by illness or age, now standing in the full strength of what they had been meant to be, somewhere in the vicinity of 30 years old, though age is the wrong word for what I was seeing. Wholeness is closer. And the reunions began. parents running toward grown children they had released too soon, old men standing straight for the first time in half a century, grandmothers sweeping up grandchildren into arms that, a heartbeat ago, had been folded in hospital beds. And among them, threading through every gathering, mothers holding infants they had never been permitted to hold in this life. Babies lost to miscarriage, to complications, to the cruelty of bodies that could not carry them far enough. Now, here, real, breathing, opening their eyes for the very first time and finding the face that had wept over them for decades, and moving through the entire scene, weaving between the knees and the legs and the outstretched hands of that reunited crowd, were the animals. Dogs of every size, bounding across the grass with a joy so uncomplicated it made my chest ache. Horses cantering unsaddled in the far meadows. Small creatures I had only ever seen on the sides of roads, unharmed, unhurried, moving among the people freely, pressing their heads into any hand that reached down, running alongside any child who ran, bringing their particular gladness to whomever they passed, not searching for anyone in particular, not reclaiming old arrangements, simply present, their whole nature poured out into the joy of the place, distributed across every life there, like warmth from a hearth distributed across every corner of a room. And in the middle of all of it, holding the entire scene together the way a keystone holds a vault, I felt the presence of the one who had designed it. Not seen, felt. A living awareness so vast that the entire restored field and every reunion inside it existed inside him the way a painting exists inside the quality of its light. And in the warmth of that presence, with the restored field still unfolding in front of me, the question I had been avoiding my whole life finally arrived. Not as an accusation, as a mirror. Who, it asked me, without words, who have you actually been worshiping? I started to answer. I had 31 years of answers ready. The prayers, the books, the committees, the tithes, the respectable life, the decent reputation, the reliable presence at every gathering where a decent and reliable presence was expected. I had a whole resume of devotion prepared, and I began, reflexively, to file it. And then I saw the table again. Not in front of me, inside me. The same long dark surface, the same Mercury plan. And at the head of it, seated in the chief seat where a sovereign would sit, was me. Not my higher self, not my soul. The version of me that had spent 54 years being carefully managed, carefully displayed, carefully defended. The I that had been the unacknowledged center of every one of those prayers, every one of those committees, every one of those morning readings. I had been praying toward a creator and for an audience. I had built an entire religious life, and the God I had actually served faithfully, daily, without ever missing a single offering, was myself. And then, without anger, without condemnation, the quiet sentence I will carry for the rest of my days. You honored me with your lips, but your whole life was a monument to the one sitting in your own chair. No punishment attached to it. That is the part that broke me. There was no punishment, because the sentence itself was enough. It described me with a precision that no human critic, no enemy, no therapist could ever have matched, because it came from the only one who had watched every unobserved moment of my 54 years and had counted with perfect accuracy how many of them had been performed for an audience of me. And I understood in that instant why the 7 at the table had never needed to attack me directly. They didn't have to. I had been running their operation on their behalf. Every time I chose the version of a story that made me the hero, fed. Every time I nursed a small offense for weeks rather than letting it go in an hour, fed. Every time my ambition put on the clothes of service, fed. They had never needed to tempt me toward a dramatic sin. They had simply needed to keep me seated in my own chair, and I had done the seating myself. This was the real war. Not the one fought with explosions and armies. The one fought, every day, over the question of who sits at the head of the table of a human life. And the preparation for the restored field I had just seen, the actual preparation, the only one that counts, was not my rituals, not my tithes, not my reputation for decency. It was the slow, painful, stubborn work of getting out of that chair, of handing the seat to the one who actually built the table, of letting the fuels of hatred and fear find no kindling in me, because the self they needed to burn had been quietly, willingly set aside. And then my escort turned me one final time, and the field began to fold, not violently, the way a letter folds. The reunions, the animals, the impossible colors, the presence at the center of it, all of it gathered itself back into the single point it had come from, and the point began to recede. And I understood, with a sorrow that was somehow also obedience, that I was being sent back. There was a sentence pressed into me as I went, not spoken, given, the way a letter is given to a courier who has a long road ahead. Go back. Tell them who is actually at the head of the table. Most of them do not know. And then the return came. If the leaving had been the shedding of a coat, the return was being shoved back into one soaked in ice water. The weight of a body crashed into me all at once. The pain of a chest that had been electrically forced back into rhythm. The hammering of a heart that had just been restarted for the third time. The cold tile of the warehouse floor beneath my cheek. The shouting of a paramedic whose hand was pressed against my neck. The raw, animal effort of drawing a single breath back into lungs that had forgotten how. I came back crying, not from the pain, though the pain was immense, from the missing. I had just been shown the only room in existence where I had ever been fully known, and now I was lying on concrete under fluorescent tubes, and the distance between those two places was almost more than I could carry. The first person I saw clearly, when my vision finally steadied, was the paramedic still kneeling beside me, a woman perhaps 30 years old, sweat on her forehead, paddles still in her hands. She was looking at me with the particular expression medical professionals reserve for patients who should not, by any reasonable interpretation of their instruments, be looking back. I tried to sit up. She pressed me down gently, and then I said something I had no intention of saying, something that was not mine to decide. I looked at her and I said, "Your father is not suffering. He is resting. You can stop asking whether he felt afraid at the end. He did not." Space post. She went completely still. Her hands went slack on the paddles. I found out, weeks later when she came to visit me in the hospital, that her father had died 8 months earlier of a stroke, and that the single question she had not been able to stop asking herself, the question she had never voiced to anyone, was whether he had been frightened in his final seconds. I had never met her before in my life. I'm talking directly to you now, and I want to be careful with these last words because I know some of you are listening through layers of grief I cannot see. If someone you love has gone, if there is an absence in your life that has reshaped every room you walk into, listen to me. They are not fighting a battle somewhere. They are not lost. They are not wandering in any corridor, bright or dark, waiting for something to be resolved. They are resting. A rest so deep, so total, so merciful, that every year you spend missing them will register to them as no duration at all. Their final breath in this life and their first breath in the restored one will meet each other without any gap between them, like the two edges of a page that has been folded closed. The field I was shown is real. The restoration is real. The reunions are real. And whatever arguments I could make about why I was allowed to see it, unworthy as I was, performative as I was, seated in my own chair as I had been for 54 years. None of them matter compared to the fact that I was sent back with a single assignment, to tell you. And the assignment has a second half. Because the vision of the field was not the whole of what I was shown, the table came first. The war came first. And the reason I was made to see the war before I was made to see the field is this. Most of us are soldiers in a conflict we have never identified, fighting in a uniform we have never inspected, for a commander seated in a chair we have never thought to question. The commander, in most cases, is the self. The chair, in most cases, is the chair of our own life. And the two fuels, hatred and fear, in all their clever, respectable disguises, will keep burning in us for as long as we remain seated. The only preparation that matters between this moment and the morning of the restored field is getting up out of that chair. Not through any particular building, not through any specific label, through the daily, honest, sometimes clumsy work of seeking the one who actually designed the table and asking him again and again to sit where you have been sitting. That is the whole task. Everything smaller than that is smaller than it looks. Everything larger than that does not exist. I lived 31 years of a respectable religious life, and I was fighting on the wrong side the entire time. And no one could tell, including me. Do not let that be your story. Do not wait for a defibrillator to show you who is sitting in your chair. Check now. Quietly. honestly, while there is still time to trade seats. That morning is coming. The field is real. And on that morning, the only question that will matter, the only one, is whose voice was being answered when you prayed. Tell me in the comments, who is the person you most want to run toward on that morning? And what is the first thing you would want them to know about you? I'll read every single one.